You don't belong in our lives anymore." An 83-year-old woman sat completely still, clutching a paper napkin so tightly her knuckles turned white, while her own son delivered those words across a diner table like he was canceling a subscription. No hesitation, no remorse, just cold, quiet finality. And she apologized. That's the part that broke everyone who witnessed it. She actually said sorry. If you've ever felt invisible to the people you sacrificed everything for, this story is for you. Subscribe, stay until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Evelyn Harper had ironed her blouse 3 times that morning. Not because she was vain. She hadn't been vain in years. But when your son calls after 6 weeks of silence and says he wants to meet for lunch, you iron your blouse. You pin your hair back the way you used to when things were good. You put on the small pearl earrings your late husband gave you for your 55th wedding anniversary. Even though one of the clasps doesn't close right anymore, and you have to hold your head slightly to the left so it doesn't fall. You do all of that because you still have hope. That is the cruelest thing about hope at 83. It doesn't care how many times it's been wrong before. It just keeps showing up quiet and stubborn like a cat that refuses to leave even after you've stopped feeding it. Evelyn's neighbor Ruth had offered to drive her to the diner. Ruth was 71 and still sharp behind the wheel, a big-boned woman with reading glasses permanently perched on her head, and a habit of saying exactly what she thought, which Evelyn found both exhausting and deeply comforting. "You nervous?" Ruth had asked, pulling out of the driveway. "No," Evelyn said. Ruth had glanced at her sideways. "You're holding that purse like it owes you money." Evelyn looked down. She loosened her grip. "Maybe a little nervous." "Has he said what it's about?" "He said he just wanted to see me." She paused. "That's what he said." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Ruth was rarely quiet. That alone told Evelyn something. "You want me to come in with you?" "No." Evelyn shook her head firmly. "No, I don't want it to make it into something bigger than it is. It's just as lunch." She said it twice. Just lunch. The way people say things twice when they're trying to make themselves believe it. The diner was called Haggerty's. It had been on the same stretch of Route 12 for 40 years, the kind of place that survived, not because the food was exceptional, but because it was honest. Big portions, strong coffee booths that had held 1,000 conversations, most of them ordinary, some of them not. The parking lot was half full when Ruth pulled in, and Evelyn could see Michael's silver sedan already there, parked straight and precise, the way Michael parked everything. He had always been precise. Even as a boy, he lined up his sneakers beside the door, color-coded his school folders, grew up to be an engineer, then a project manager, then whatever his current title was. Evelyn had trouble keeping track because he changed companies the way other people change shirts, always climbing, always looking for the next rung. She had been proud of that once. She wasn't sure what she felt about it now. "Call me when you're done," Ruth said as Evelyn opened the door. "I will." And Evelyn, Ruth caught her arm gently. "You don't have to apologize for anything in there. You hear me? Whatever he says, whatever she says, Ruth. I'm serious. I know you are." Evelyn patted her hand. "I'll call you when I'm done." She walked in alone. The bell above the door chimed when she entered, the soft kind of sound that belonged to a different era. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease and something faintly sweet, maple syrup probably. And for just a second, walking through that door, Evelyn felt a flicker of something almost like peace. She used to bring Michael here. Not this specific diner, but places like it. Saturday mornings when he was 7, 8, 9 years old, before he got too old to want to spend Saturday mornings with his mother. He used to order chocolate milk and pancakes and draw on the paper placemats with the crayons the waitresses kept in little cups by the register. He had been so easy to love then. She spotted him immediately, booth near the window second from the left. He was sitting with Vanessa, his wife of 14 years. Vanessa was 47, thin in the way expensive effort produces, with highlighted hair, cut bluntly at the jaw, and nails always painted in colors with names like Taupe Dream or Whisper Beige. She was a woman who communicated a great deal through the quality of her silence, and today, before Evelyn had even reached the booth, Vanessa's silence was already communicating. Michael stood when he saw her. Old manners, his mother had taught him that. "Mom," he hugged her briefly, the kind of hug that has a predetermined length, and gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit down." How was the drive? Ruth brought me. It was fine. She slid into the booth. Hi, Vanessa. Vanessa looked up from her phone. Evelyn. She smiled in the specific way that doesn't reach anything above the cheekbones. A waitress appeared almost immediately, young red-haired name tag that said Brianna, and filled Evelyn's coffee cup without being asked, which Evelyn found quietly touching. She ordered eggs and toast. Michael ordered just coffee. Vanessa ordered water with lemon and nothing else, which meant this was not a meal she planned to be present for very long. Evelyn noticed that. She noticed all of it the way old women notice everything when they've learned that the details are usually where the truth hides. So, she said, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. It's good to see you, Michael. It's been a while. I know, I'm sorry. Work has been 6 weeks, Evelyn said. Not accusatory, just factual. Since your birthday dinner, that was the last time. Michael set his jaw slightly. Things have been busy. Of course, she smiled. Let it go. She had always let it go. How are the kids? How's Joshua doing with his mom? Michael's voice dropped half a register. It was the voice he used when he was about to deliver news he had rehearsed. She had heard that voice exactly twice before in her life, once when he told her he was leaving his first wife, and once when he told her his father's cancer had returned. She set down her coffee cup. What is it? She asked quietly. Oh, he glanced at Vanessa. Vanessa gave the smallest of nods, the kind of nod that meant go ahead. We discussed this, stick to the plan. Mom, we need to talk about some things, about the situation, about how things have been. What situation? He exhaled slowly through his nose. You know that Vanessa and I have been carrying a lot lately, financially, with the kids, with everything. And we've been doing a lot of thinking. Evelyn looked at him steadily. Her heart had started beating with a particular kind of heaviness, the kind that's less like fear and more like recognition, like something deep inside her already knew. What kind of thinking was she asked? Mom, I can't keep being responsible for. There are things you expect from me that I'm not able to give anymore. The calls, the checking in, the ball. I call you once a week, Michael. I know that. On Sundays, and sometimes you don't answer. I know that, Mom, and I haven't asked you for money since Frank died. Her voice remained even, controlled. I have my pension. I have the house. It's not about money. No, c'est money. Vanessa's voice entering the conversation for the first time was precise and practiced. It's about energy. It's about where we are in our lives and what we're able to sustain. We're building something. We have goals. And there are relationships that pull against that. Evelyn turned to look at her daughter-in-law very carefully. Relationships, she repeated. We've been in therapy, Michael said quickly, like that would soften something. The therapist has encouraged us to be honest about our boundaries, about what's healthy for us. Healthy, Evelyn said. Yes. The words sat in the air between them like something with a bad smell. And visiting your mother once every 6 weeks is not healthy for you, Evelyn said slowly. Is that what you're saying? Michael looked at the table. It's more complicated than that. Michael. She said his name the way she had said it when he was 12 years old, and she already knew he was lying about something. Look at me. He looked up, and she saw it. She saw the thing she had been sensing for 2 years, maybe longer, the things she had explained away and rationalized and buried under excuses because it was too terrible to look at directly. She saw that her son had made a decision. Not today, not this week. Some time ago, in some conversation she wasn't part of, in some quiet room with his wife. And maybe that therapist, he had made the decision that she was an inconvenience he could no longer afford. Say what you came to say, she told him. Please, just say it. He took a breath. You don't belong in our lives anymore, Mom. I'm sorry, but that's where we are. Well, then, there are moments in life that don't announce themselves as the moments they are. They arrive dressed as ordinary things, a lunch at a diner, a cup of coffee, a Tuesday afternoon, and then they reach into your chest and rearrange everything, and nothing inside you ever quite sits the same way again. Evelyn felt the words land. She felt them pass through her like cold water through an open wound. She had told herself, walking in that whatever he said, she would not cry in public. She was 83 years old, and she had buried a husband and survived a cancer scare at 71 and raised a son through a recession with $340 in a savings account, and she was not going to give a roadside diner the scene of her crying over eggs she hadn't even eaten yet. So she didn't cry. She picked up her coffee cup with both hands. They were shaking, but only slightly, and she pressed the cup against her palms to disguise it, and she looked at her son for a long time. "I see," she finally said. "Mom." "No, The word came out quieter than a whisper, but it stopped him. "I'd like a moment, please." Brianna, the red-haired waitress, had materialized somewhere to her left with a coffee pot. She took one look at the table and performed the small miracle that good waitresses perform. In moments like these, she disappeared without making a sound. Vanessa was already on her phone, actually on her phone, thumb scrolling, face angled down, as if the conversation were already resolved and she was simply waiting for the formality of it to conclude. That somehow was worse than anything Michael had said. Evelyn set her coffee cup down. She smoothed the napkin in her lap, and then she did the thing that would haunt her for years afterward, the thing that certain witnesses in that diner would tell other people about, would carry home with them, and sit with over their own dinners, would think about in the quiet moments before sleep. She said, "I'm sorry if I've been a burden." She apologized. To her son, who had just told her she didn't belong in his life. She apologized. "Mom, you don't have to." "No, I mean it. I know things have been hard. I know it's not easy at my age. I don't always." Her voice broke slightly just once, a small fracture that she immediately sealed. "I don't always know what you need from me, and I've probably gotten that wrong sometimes, and I'm sorry for that." Michael's face had done something complicated. For a second, just a second, there was something in it that looked like shame. But Vanessa shifted in her seat and the moment passed. "We appreciate that," Vanessa said briskly. "We do, and we hope you understand that this is about us taking care of ourselves. It's not personal." Not personal. Evelyn's son was removing her from his life. Not personal. She looked at Vanessa for what felt like a very long time. Long enough for Vanessa to glance up from her phone and encounter the look on Evelyn's face, and then look away again quickly. It was at that precise moment, that exact second, that a large hand set a coffee cup down onto the counter 3 booths away, and a man who had been sitting alone with his back partially turned rose very slowly from his seat. Evelyn didn't notice him yet. She was still looking at her son, at the face she had once pressed her lips against 1,000 times in his early years, the face she had watched by the light of a hallway nightlight to make sure he was still breathing, when he had croupi at 4 years old, the face she had framed in a photograph that still sat on her bedside table. And she was trying to understand how a person becomes something their own child needs to escape from. She was trying to understand how love becomes a weight. She was still apologizing. She was still apologizing when the man reached the edge of her booth. He was not what anyone in that diner would have predicted. But he was tall, not casually tall, but the kind of tall that changes the spatial dynamics of a room, that makes ceilings feel lower and booths feel smaller. His shoulders filled the leather vest he wore, dark and worn, in the particular way that speaks of mileage, rather than neglect, the kind of worn in that is a history rather than a flaw. His hair was silver blonde, tied back at the base of his neck, and there were scars on his right hand that he made no effort to hide. His face was the face of a man who had been through a substantial number of things and come out the other side of all of them with a particular quality, not hardness exactly, but settledness. Like a man who has already decided the things that matter and no longer needs to revisit the question. He had been sitting in the corner booth when Evelyn walked in. She hadn't registered him particularly the way you don't register the furniture. He'd had 2 cups of coffee and a piece of and a general air of someone with nowhere pressing to be. But he had been listening, not intrusively, not leaned forward with cupped ears, just the ordinary listening that happens when you're sitting 12 feet from a conversation and the person speaking chooses words that find you regardless of whether you're trying to hear them. "You don't belong in our lives anymore." He had heard that. And he had heard something else too, something most people wouldn't have caught, something in the quality of the silence that followed the sound of a person absorbing a blow without raising their arms. He knew that sound. He had heard it once before, a long time ago, from someone else. Someone who had also ironed her blouse and worn her good earrings and sat across from people who had decided she was inconvenient. He set down his coffee cup with his jaw set and his decision made, and he walked to the booth. "Excuse me." His voice was quiet, but it carried the way a deep note carries. You feel it in your chest before your ears fully register it. Michael looked up sharply. He was a man unused to being physically overshadowed, and something in his posture immediately recalibrated. "I'm sorry, this is a private—" "I'm not talking to you yet." The man looked at Evelyn, only at Evelyn. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt. My name's Cole." He paused. "Mind if I sit here a minute?" Evelyn stared at him. We're in the middle of—" "I know, I heard." He said it without apology or embarrassment, "and I'm just going to need 60 seconds of your time if that's all right." Michael started to stand. "Hey, pal." "Sir." Cole's eyes moved to him, and something in them made Michael stop mid-motion and sit back down. Not a threat. Something harder to argue with than a threat. "I'm going to ask you to give me 60 seconds. The booth beside Evelyn was empty. Cole slid into it, facing her. He folded his large hands on the table in front of him and looked at her with a directness that was somehow not unkind, the look of someone who sees you precisely because they have chosen to. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, simply, like a fact. Evelyn felt her throat close. "Whatever they told you," Cole continued, "whatever they've been telling you, and I don't know the whole story, and I'm not pretending I do what you just said, what you just apologized for. You shouldn't have had to apologize for that. You shouldn't have had to apologize for being alive and old and someone's mother." "This is completely," Vanessa began. "Ma'am," Cole said without looking away from Evelyn, "I heard you say it wasn't personal. That's the only part I'd push back on. This is the most personal thing there is." "You need to leave right now," Michael said, his voice controlled, but with something fraying underneath it. "You don't know anything about our family. You don't know what she's put us through. What she's put you through." Cole repeated the words, not as a question, not with sarcasm, just repeated them so they could be heard again by everyone at the table, including the person who'd said them. Michael's jaw tightened. The entire diner had gone the particular quiet that a room goes when everyone has simultaneously stopped pretending they aren't listening. Cole looked back at Evelyn. "Do you have somewhere to go after this?" The question was so simple and so devastating that for a moment Evelyn couldn't respond, because the real answer was no. Ruth would come get her. Ruth would make tea and sit with her and say the right things. But there was a version of somewhere to go that meant something deeper than logistics, something that had to do with belonging and mattering and being wanted, and the answer to that version of the question was something Evelyn hadn't let herself think about directly in a very long time. Her lip trembled. Just once, she pressed them together. "I'm fine," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. This stranger, this large, scarred, silver-haired man who had interrupted her humiliation to look her in the eye and ask whether she had anywhere to go. And for reasons she couldn't have articulated, for reasons that had more to do with the quality of his attention than any words he'd said, she told him the truth. "No," she whispered. "Not really. No." And Cole nodded once slowly. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Michael, and the look was not angry. Anger would have been easier to dismiss. It was something quieter and more damaging than anger. It was disappointed. It was the look of a man who has seen what a person is and finds it smaller than he'd hoped. Then Cole turned back to Evelyn and extended his hand across the table. Large, rough, steady. "All right then," he said. "You do now, best." And Evelyn Harper stared at that hand for 4 full seconds. She thought about Ruth, who was waiting in the parking lot. She thought about her pearl earring, which had been slowly sliding loose throughout this entire conversation. She thought about the eggs she hadn't eaten, and the coffee she'd barely touched, and the blouse she had ironed 3 times. She thought about her son, who had looked at the table instead of her face. She thought about all the Sundays she had not called because she didn't want to be a bother. All the ailments she had downplayed on the phone, all the visits she had cut short because she could feel even through a screen that her presence was less welcome than she wished it were. She thought about Frank, her late husband, her Frank, and what he would say if he were sitting in this booth right now. She knew exactly what he'd say. He'd say, "Evie, take the man's hand." She placed her hand in Cole's. It was small and trembling, in his thin, skinned, and cool the hand of a woman who had worked her whole life and was still working, still fighting the small daily battle of remaining dignified in a world that kept reassigning her value downward. Cole didn't squeeze too hard. He didn't make it dramatic. He just steadied her. Okay then, he said gently. Let's get you up. Michael's chair scraped back. Mom, wait. You don't even know this person. Evelyn stood, slowly. She was steady on her feet. She had always been steady on her feet. It was one of the things she was quietly proud of. She retrieved her purse from the booth seat and she tucked it under her arm. She looked at her son. He was still in the booth. He had not stood. He had not come around the table. He had pushed his chair back, but he had not come to her. I know him better than you think, she said. He looked at me. She said it without accusation, as a simple, plain statement of what had happened. Ma, then she turned, placed her free hand on Cole's arm for balance more than affection, and walked toward the door of Haggerty's diner past Brianna, who was standing very still near the coffee station, with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, past two older gentlemen at the counter, who both nodded at Evelyn as she passed in the particular way that men of a certain generation used to say, I see you and I'm sorry, and good for you, past the table of young mothers with strollers who had long since stopped pretending to eat. The bell above the door chimed again when she pushed through it. Outside, the afternoon air hit her face and she stopped for a moment on the concrete step. Her pearl earring finally gave up its fight and fell, and Cole caught it in his palm before it hit the ground, a small, almost unnoticeable thing, but she noticed it. She looked out at the parking lot. There were motorcycles, quite a few of them, and people in leather vests, and some of them were already looking toward the door. Those are your people, she asked. Some of them, Cole said. The rest are just good people who happen to be riding today. Evelyn took a slow breath, the kind of breath you take when you're deciding something. Behind her through the glass, she could see Michael still sitting in the booth. Vanessa had her phone out. Neither of them had moved to follow her. She had known on some level walking into that diner that Michael wasn't going to say the things she needed him to say. She had known it the way you know the weather before you look out the window, a knowledge that lives in the body rather than the mind. She had known, and she had come anyway because hope doesn't care about what you know. But standing here in the afternoon light with a stranger's careful hands in a parking lot full of unfamiliar faces, she understood something had ended inside that diner. And something else, something she didn't have a name for yet, was waiting to begin. She squared her shoulders. She looked at Cole Ryder. Well, she said, and her voice was steadier than either of them might have expected. I suppose you'd better introduce me to your people. And for the first time in 6 weeks, maybe longer, Evelyn Harper almost smiled. The first thing Evelyn noticed about Cole's people was that none of them pretended. And that sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. Evelyn had spent the last decade of her life surrounded by people who pretended, people who said we should get together soon, and never called people who asked, how are you doing, while already looking past her shoulder for a more interesting answer. People who smiled at her face and discussed her behind her back in the particular hushed tones reserved for the elderly and the inconvenient. She had gotten so accustomed to the gap between what people said and what they meant that she had started reading the gap instead of the words. Most of these people had no gap. A woman named Diane reached her first. She was somewhere in her early 60s, silver-haired, built solidly, with laugh lines so deep they had become architectural features of her face. She walked up to Evelyn with the direct, unhurried confidence of someone who has never once in her life worried about whether she was too much. Cole texted ahead, Diane said by way of explanation, extending her hand. I'm Diane. He said you might need some company. He texted you from inside the diner. Evelyn looked at Cole. Bathroom break, Cole said without elaborating. You planned this, Evelyn said slowly. I hoped for it, Cole corrected. Planning would have assumed I knew how it went. I didn't. Evelyn studied him for a moment. There was something about that distinction between planning and hoping that she turned over carefully in her mind. It was the distinction of a man who understood the difference between control and faith. Well, she said, here I am. Here you are, Diane agreed warmly and took her other arm with the easy naturalness of someone who has helped people stand up from harder places than a diner parking lot. There were 11 of them in total. 11 people who had been eating breakfast at the truck stop across the highway and had redirected themselves at a text from Cole that said apparently 3 words, need the crew. That was it. 3 words, and they had paid their checks and ridden over. Evelyn would find this out later, and when she did, she would have to excuse herself to the bathroom for a few minutes, for reasons she didn't explain to anyone. But that was later. Right now, she was still processing the immediate reality of 11 strangers looking at her with expressions that contained not a single molecule of pity. That was the other thing she noticed. No pity. Pity she could have identified immediately. She had become fluent in it. This was something different. This was the particular look of people who have survived their own difficult things and recognize the signs of survival in others without making it smaller than it is. A man with a long gray beard and forearms like bridge cables shook her hand and introduced himself as Bear, which she assumed was a nickname and didn't ask about. A younger woman, 30-something maybe, with a sleeve of tattoos and enormous dark eyes, said her name was Priya and squeezed Evelyn's hand in both of hers and said simply, "We've got you." A quiet man named Dutch, who appeared to communicate primarily through nods, gave her the most affirming nod she had ever received. A wiry, red-headed man named Patch made a joke she didn't quite catch, but laughed at his own punchline so genuinely that she found herself almost laughing too, which surprised her. She had not expected to be anywhere near laughing. Cole was watching her navigate all of this with the same settled attention he'd shown in the diner. Not hovering, not managing, just present. "I don't know how to ride a motorcycle," Evelyn said suddenly. She wasn't sure why she said it. It felt like the most immediately true thing about her situation. "I know," Cole said. "I've never been on one." "That's all right. What if I fall?" "You won't. You can't know that." "I know how to drive, so you won't," he said patiently. "There's a difference." She looked at the line of motorcycles. They were large and loud-looking, even standing still, vibrating with a kind of latent energy that made the air around them feel different. "This is a very strange day," she said. "Yeah," Cole agreed. "It is." "I called my neighbor Ruth," Evelyn said. "She's waiting for me. She'll be worried if—" "Call her," Cole said immediately. "Tell her you're okay. Tell her where you're going. Give her my number if you want." He pulled out his phone and held it toward her with the number visible on the screen. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm just asking you to trust enough to take the next step." Evelyn looked at the number. Then she took out her own phone, a smartphone her grandson had spent 45 minutes teaching her to use the previous Christmas, and she called Ruth. Ruth picked up on the first ring. "Evelyn, I've been sitting here watching the door." "What's happening?" "Should I come in?" No, don't come in." Evelyn turned slightly away from the group. "Something happened. I'm going with someone. Some people." A pause. "What kind of people?" "Bikers." A longer pause. "Evelyn Marie Harper." "I know. You're telling me you walked out of that diner and you're now leaving with a biker." "Bikers, plural. There are 11 of them." "That's supposed to be more reassuring." Despite herself, despite everything, Evelyn laughed. It was a short sound, almost startled out of her, but it was real. "His name is Cole Ryder. I'm going to read you his number." "Write it down, Ruth." She read the number. She could hear Ruth writing the scratch of pen on the notepad she kept by her kitchen chair. "And Michael," Ruth said after a moment. The question landed differently than Ruth probably intended. It was a simple question, what about Michael, but it contained everything, the drive there, the ironed blouse, the earring, the apology, the hand she had extended across the table that had not been taken. "Michael is still in the diner," Evelyn said. Another pause, longer this time. "Okay," Ruth should have said quietly. "Okay, sweetheart, you go, but you call me tonight. You call me tonight or I swear I will drive every highway in Montana." "I'll call you tonight. I love you, Evelyn." "I love you, Ruth." She hung up, held the phone for a second. Then she put it in her purse, straightened her back, and turned around to face the group. "All right," she said. "Let's go." Oh, Bear made a sound that might have been a cheer. Diane grinned. Priya reached over and very gently adjusted the collar of Evelyn's blouse, the small matter-of-fact gesture of someone who helps without asking permission because asking would make it bigger than it needs to be. Cole helped her onto the back of his motorcycle with the care of someone transporting something genuinely irreplaceable. He showed her where to put her hands, how to lean, told her to look past his shoulder at the horizon rather than at the ground. "What if I panic?" she asked. "Tap my left shoulder twice," he said. "I'll pull over immediately." "And if once, that means you're okay, but you want me to know you're thinking about it." She considered this. That's a good system. Had some practice. The engine started beneath her and she gripped his jacket instinctively. The vibration traveled up through the frame of the bike and into her bones, and for one full second, she was entirely certain she had made a profound and irreversible mistake. Then Diane's bike pulled alongside hers with Diane's silver hair catching the light, and Diane caught her eye and gave her a look that said, "You've got this old girl," without a single word, and the convoy moved. The wind hit her face, and for a moment she couldn't breathe, not from fear but from the sheer physical fact of forward momentum after what felt like a very long period of standing still. She didn't tap the left shoulder. She held on. Bam! They rode for 37 minutes, which she knew because she counted the time automatically the way anxious people do. But somewhere around the 20-minute mark, something shifted. Her grip on Cole's jacket loosened slightly, not from carelessness, but from something closer to release. The air was different at this speed. It didn't give you time to replay conversations or rehearse things you should have said. It just pushed through you forward, constant, indifferent, in the best possible way. Boom. Evelyn had not thought about Michael for 11 minutes by the time they pulled off the highway. She would realize this later and find it remarkable. The clubhouse was not what she expected. She had no clear idea what she had expected. Something rough, maybe. Something that smelled like gasoline and bad decisions. What it actually was a large converted building with mismatched chairs and long wooden tables, and the smell of coffee so strong it announced itself before you reached the door. The walls were covered in photographs, event flyers, handwritten notes, a large corkboard near the entrance with names and dates, and what appeared to be a sign-up sheet for something called the Sunrise Ride for Seniors. That last one stopped her. She stood in front of the corkboard and read the sheet carefully. The Sunrise Ride for Seniors was a monthly event where the group escorted elderly residents from care homes, from isolation, from wherever they found them, on short motorcycle rides around the county. The sheet had dates going back 2 years. The attendance numbers were in the dozens. "This is what you do," she said to no one in particular. Cole was beside her. "One of the things, yeah. You find old people and take them for rides. We find old people who haven't been outside in a while and remind them that moving feels good." She turned and looked at him with an expression he would describe later to Diane as the look of someone doing arithmetic that keeps coming out to a number they didn't expect. "Why?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. He found a chair, turned it around, and sat on it backwards the way men of a certain type always sit on chairs, forearms resting on the back. He looked at the floor for a moment. "My mother's name was Carol," he said. "She had 4 kids. I was the youngest. When my dad left, she kept all 4 of us together by working 2 jobs and never once complaining about it to any of us because she thought complaining was weakness, which it wasn't, but that's what she believed." He paused. "When she got older, my brother, oldest one, the responsible one, the one with the nice house and the right job, decided she was too much to manage. He had her moved to a facility 2 hours away without really asking the rest of us. She spent the last 3 years of her life 2 hours from everyone she knew." Evelyn was very still. "I couldn't fix that," Cole said. "No, I tried, but I was going through some things myself at the time, and I didn't fight hard enough. And she died in that facility, and I've had to live with that." He looked up. "So, that's why." The honesty of it hit Evelyn like a physical weight. Not the sad story, she had her own sad stories, everyone past 60 did, but the directness of it. He had simply told her the truth without performing the telling of it, without managing her reaction, without making it about anything other than what it was. "I'm sorry about your mother," she said. "I'm sorry about your son," he said. They looked at each other across the small distance of the room, and something passed between them that had no name, but was felt by both and was in its way a kind of recognition. It was Diane who broke the moment by appearing from the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee and the announcement that someone had heated up the breakfast casserole from yesterday and that everyone was welcome, and that yes, Evelyn, that included her, and no, she didn't have to do anything except sit down. "I'm not used to sitting down," Evelyn said. "Nobody good is?" Diane said cheerfully. "Learn anyway." She sat. She drank the coffee, which was stronger than anything she'd had in years, and exactly right. She watched the room fill, people moving in and out, conversations overlapping, somebody's dog wandering between table legs, and she had the strange, disorienting sensation of being in a place that operated by a different set of rules than the places she had recently inhabited. Rules she didn't know yet, but that seemed navigable. Bear put a plate in front of her without asking. Eggs toast the casserole. Eat, he said, as if this were a simple declarative fact rather than a suggestion. I never got to eat my eggs at the diner, she said. These are better, Bear said with the absolute confidence of someone who has never doubted a sentence in his life. She ate. It was in fact better. But Priya sat across from her and asked where she was from originally, and Evelyn said Indiana, and Priya said she'd never been to Indiana. And Evelyn said there were parts worth going to and parts that were mostly soybeans. And Priya laughed the real kind of laugh, the kind you can't manufacture. And Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, some muscle she had been holding, contracted for so long she had forgotten it was tense. She told them about Frank. Not because anyone pushed her to, but because his name came up naturally when she explained how she'd ended up in Montana. She had followed Michael here when Frank died, believing that proximity to her son would fill the space Frank left. A belief that had proven over several years to be incorrect in ways that had accumulated slowly, and then suddenly the way all accumulations do. Nobody at the table responded to this with advice. Nobody told her what she should have done differently, or offered a positive reframe, or said everything happens for a reason. Diane just said, that's a hard thing, following your grief somewhere and finding more grief. And Dutch nodded his most expressive nod yet. And Bear refilled her coffee without being asked. She talked for nearly 40 minutes. About Frank, about Indiana, about working double shifts at the restaurant when Michael was in college, about the year she had spent learning watercolor painting, and the fact that she had 2 paintings in her house that were genuinely good, and she wasn't embarrassed to say so. She talked and they listened, not the polite half-listening of people waiting for their turn, but the real listening of people who have chosen to be present. She was in the middle of describing one of the watercolors, a field scene she was particularly proud of when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Michael. The table went quiet. Not dramatically, nobody made a show of it. But Evelyn felt the quality of the air change, felt the attention in the room shift, felt 11 people simultaneously give her the space to handle whatever this was. She looked at the phone for 4 rings. On the 5th ring, she set it face down on the table. It stopped ringing. She picked up her coffee cup. He'll call back, Priya said quietly, not a question. Maybe, Evelyn said, or maybe not. Either way, she stopped. She was about to say, either way, I'll manage, which was what she always said, the reflexive self-sufficiency of a woman who had raised herself past the expectation of being supported. But that phrase tasted different now inside this room after this morning. Managing was one thing. This was something else. Either way, she said again, and this time she let it end there. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Diane was looking at her with the particular expression of a woman who understands exactly what just happened. Not the phone call, but the choosing not to answer it. The small, radical act of deciding that the call could wait, that she could wait, that she did not need to immediately make herself available. Good girl, Diane said softly. Evelyn lifted an eyebrow. I'm 83. You're still learning, Diane said, and it wasn't an insult, and both of them knew it. Cole, who had been leaning against the far wall with his coffee, watching all of this, with the quiet attention he seemed to bring to everything, pushed off the wall and walked over. There's something I want to show you, he said. She followed him down a short hallway to a smaller room she hadn't seen yet, a room with a long table covered in papers, photographs, and maps. The maps had routes marked on them, blue lines threading across county roads, with small annotations in handwriting she couldn't fully read from standing. What is this? She asked. Planning for the spring ride, Cole said. We do a big one every year. Different this year, we're partnering with 3 senior centers to do a full convoy with about 40 riders and 22 seniors from the community. Oldest participant last year was 89. Yeah, Evelyn leaned over the table and looked at one of the photographs from a previous ride. In it, an elderly man, thin, white-haired, enormous grin, was seated behind a broad-shouldered rider with both arms raised like someone who has just cleared the top of a roller coaster. The joy in his face was so unguarded, so complete, that it looked almost violent in its intensity. She picked up the photograph and held it close. Who is this? Gus Martino, 79 years old, spent 11 months in a care home after a hip replacement. His daughter lived across the state. He told us when we found him that he hadn't laughed in 8 months. Cole let that land. He laughed 6 times on that ride. Diane counted. Evelyn set the photograph down carefully. She pressed her fingertips against it for a moment, not quite able to say what she was feeling. I have a skill set, she said suddenly. Cole looked at her. What? Well, I'm not trying to be modest and I'm not trying to brag. I need you to understand this. I spent 31 years in food service. I can cook for 200 people without breaking a sweat. I can organize a community breakfast for 60. I kept the books for the restaurant for the last 10 years I worked there. I can budget. I can plan a menu. I can figure out logistics for events in my sleep. She looked at him directly. I don't want to be a recipient of your charity. I want to be useful. Cole held her gaze for a long moment. Then with the slowness of someone choosing their words carefully because he means each one, he said, we've been trying to organize a proper fundraiser for the spring ride for 2 years. We raise enough to cover fuel barely. We've got the bikes, we've got the riders, we've got the relationships with the senior centers. What we have never managed to put together is a real event, something with food and structure and actual promotion that doesn't look like Bear made it, which he has, and which is why we haven't had great turnout for the fundraiser portion. Fool, from down the hall, Bear's voice drifted. I can hear you. Good, Cole called back without turning around. Then he looked at Evelyn. We need someone who knows how to run something like that. Evelyn straightened. Something in her back did it involuntarily, the posture of a person standing inside their own competence. How much time do we have before the spring ride? She asked. 8 weeks. In the current budget, I'll show you the spreadsheet. Bear made that too. Unfortunately. Down the hall, Bear said something that might have been a protest or might have been an agreement. The acoustic quality made it hard to tell. Show me the spreadsheet, Evelyn said. Cole was already moving toward the table. And for the next 2 hours in that back room with the maps and the photographs and the handwriting, she was already beginning to decipher. Evelyn Harper stopped being the woman who had been abandoned at a diner and started being someone else entirely. And as she asked pointed questions, she made 3 phone calls to an old contact at a wholesale grocery distributor she had worked with for a decade, to a woman from her church who ran a community hall and owed Evelyn a favor going back to 2019, and to Ruth, who answered before the first ring completed. Are you okay? Ruth said. Write this down, Evelyn said. I need you to go to my house. The blue binder in the second kitchen drawer, the one with the recipe cards and the event planning notes from the church fundraiser. Bring it here. Bring all of it. A pause. You're organizing something. I'm organizing something. Another pause. Then with a warmth that nearly came through the phone, I'll be there in 40 minutes. Hung up and looked at Cole. He was leaning against the table with his arms crossed and the expression of a man watching something he'd hoped for but genuinely hadn't predicted. You're doing that thing, she said. What thing? That thing where you look like you're trying not to smile. I'm not sure what you mean, he said, which was almost certainly a lie. 8 weeks is enough time, Evelyn said firmly, but I need a proper list of everything you have and everything you need, and I need honest numbers, not optimistic ones. Can you do that? Yes. And I need people who will actually do what I tell them when I tell them. Diane will, Priya will, Dutch will if Diane tells him to. Bear will resist initially and then do it usually correctly. And you? Cole unfolded his arms and looked at her with those settled, direct eyes. I'll do whatever you need, Evelyn, he said. That's why I sat down at your table. She held his gaze. She was thinking about Michael. She couldn't help it. He was still in there somewhere. The fact of him, the morning of him, the 6 weeks of silence before this morning, and the silence from across the diner booth, and the silence when she stood up and he didn't follow. She thought about him, and she thought about the phone call she hadn't answered, and she thought about Ruth driving over with a blue binder, and she thought about the photograph of Gus Martino with his arms in the air. Then she picked up a pencil from the table and turned to a blank page on the legal pad in front of her. Let's start with the budget, she said, and she started writing. Ruth arrived 43 minutes after the phone call, which was 3 minutes longer than she'd promised, and something she immediately apologized for. The moment she walked through the door of the clubhouse, blue binder pressed against her chest like a shield. Construction on Route 9, she said, slightly breathless. I nearly turned around twice. Then she stopped walking and looked at the room, at the long tables, the photographs on the walls, the 11 bikers in various states of coffee consumption, and Evelyn sitting at the center of it all, with a legal pad covered in her own handwriting and a pencil tucked behind her ear. Ruth stood very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then she said, "Well, okay then." Evelyn looked up. "You brought the binder." "I brought the binder, the accordion folder from the shelf above it, and the contacts notebook from your junk drawer, because I know for a fact that's where you keep the numbers that actually matter." Ruth set everything on the table with the decisive thud of a woman who has arrived to assist and intends to be taken seriously. She looked across the table at Cole. "You're the biker." "Cole Ryder," he said and extended his hand. Ruth shook it and measured him in about 3 seconds flat. "You took care of her today." "She took care of herself," Cole said. "I just offered a different direction." Ruth looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was already opening the accordion folder. Ruth sat down. "All right," Ruth said. "What are we building?" That was the thing about Ruth that Evelyn had loved for 32 years of friendship. She didn't need the whole story before she decided to help. She just needed to know someone she trusted was in the middle of something, and then she showed up with every relevant document she could carry. Over the next hour, the back room became something close to a command center. Ruth spread the contacts notebook open and cross-referenced names with Evelyn's legal pad. Cole pulled out his laptop and opened the spreadsheet, which was as advertised, a document that looked like Bear had built it during a mild crisis with color coding that followed no discernible logic in 3 different columns, all labeled total. Evelyn looked at it for 30 seconds, exhaled through her nose, and said, "Give me the password and go get more coffee." Cole gave her the password and went to get more coffee. She rebuilt the spreadsheet from scratch in 40 minutes. Priya, who had drifted into the doorway to watch, made a small sound of appreciation when she saw the revised version. "That is genuinely beautiful," she said. "It's a budget," Evelyn said. "It's a beautiful budget." Bear appeared behind Priya, looked at the screen, and said, "My version wasn't that bad." "Your version had a column called Misky Stuff," Evelyn said without looking up. Misc stuff is a legitimate category. Not when it accounts for 30% of your projected expenditure, it isn't. Bear opened his mouth, closed it, and retreated. Cole, returning with 2 mugs, caught the tail end of this exchange and said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that Evelyn was beginning to recognize as his version of a broad grin. The numbers were not good. They were not catastrophic, but they were not good. The Spring Ride fundraiser had averaged about $4,000 in previous years, enough to cover fuel and basic logistics, not enough to expand the program. What Cole wanted this year was different in scale: 40 riders, 22 senior participants, a proper community event with food and live music, and enough visibility to attract sponsors for future years. The gap between what they had and what that required was significant. Evelyn looked at the numbers for a long time. Long enough that Ruth, who knew her tells, said quietly, "You've got something." "I've got several something," Evelyn said. "The question is which ones are worth chasing in 8 weeks. She picked up her phone and made a call. The person on the other end answered with, "Evelyn Harper, as I live and breathe." And Evelyn said, "Jerry, I need a favor, and I need you to say yes before I finish explaining it." And Jerry, whoever he was, laughed and said, "When have I ever told you no?" And 12 minutes later, she had a commitment for wholesale food pricing free for the event at 40% below what Cole's previous budget had allocated. Cole stared at her. "Jerry Hutchins," she said by way of explanation. "I fed his daughter's wedding for 200 people in 2014. He's owed me since. You've been sitting on that for 11 years. I've been waiting for the right thing to spend it on." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "What else are you sitting on?" She looked at him levelly. "You'd be surprised." Yeah, the second call was to a woman named Margaret Osei, who ran the community hall 3 miles from the clubhouse and had in fact owed Evelyn a favor since 2019, a favor involving a last-minute catering situation, a broken industrial oven, and Evelyn's ability to cook a sit-down dinner for 80 people using only 2 domestic stoves and what she described as stubbornness and a good knife. Margaret said yes before Evelyn finished the sentence. The third call was different. She stepped away from the table to make it, walked to the far end of the hallway, stood with her back to the room, and dialed a number from memory. It rang 4 times, then a voicemail. "You've reached the office of Dr. Sandra Marsh. Please leave." Evelyn hung up without leaving a message. She stood in the hallway for a moment, Sandra Marsh was a former colleague of Michael's. She had met her twice at holiday dinners years ago. A warm woman who had said once in passing that her mother had struggled with isolation after her husband died, and she wished she'd done more. Sandra had a community health nonprofit. Evelyn had thought of her immediately when she looked at Cole's budget and thought about sponsorship. And she had also thought of her because Sandra would know Michael. And Michael would know if a call was made that Evelyn was not sitting quietly somewhere, waiting for him to reconsider. She wasn't ready for that yet. She put the phone in her pocket and went back to the table. What happened over the following 3 weeks could only be described by people who watched it as a quiet takeover. Not hostile, not dramatic, just thorough. Evelyn was at the clubhouse every morning by 8. She had negotiated a ride with Diane, who lived 12 minutes from Evelyn's house, and had, with characteristic directness, simply announced on day 3 that she would be picking her up every morning and that this was not up for debate. Evelyn had pretended to consider objecting for approximately half a second and then said fine. She reorganized the fundraiser from the ground up. She designed a menu not complicated but real: brisket, roasted vegetables, 2 kinds of pie, biscuits made from a recipe that had been in her head since 1987 and had never once failed to stop a conversation. She coordinated volunteers, negotiated with suppliers, drafted a sponsorship letter that Cole read 3 times and then said, "This is better than anything we've ever sent out." "I know," Evelyn said. "That's not bragging. That's accuracy." She found them a local radio station willing to do a feature. She found a photographer, a friend of Priya's, who agreed to document the event for free in exchange for the food. She found a retired music teacher named Gerald, who played guitar, and whose trio agreed to play the event for a donation to the Senior Center program. She also found along the way something she hadn't been looking for. She found a rhythm. Not the rhythm of busyness, she had had that plenty, the frenetic motion of a woman who keeps moving so she doesn't have to feel what's standing still. This was different. This was the rhythm of work that means something which moves at a different pace, entirely slower, in some moments almost unnervingly fast in others, but always with the quality of weight, of mattering. She noticed it first on the 6th day, when Bear, who had been resistant in the specific way Cole had predicted doing things correctly after an initial objection, had come to her with a problem about the folding tables, and she had solved it in about 45 seconds. And he had looked at her with an expression of pure, unguarded respect and said, "How did you know that?" And she had said, "Because I've been solving problems like this since before you were born, Bear." And he had laughed a huge, genuine laugh and called to someone across the room, "Grandma Eve just destroyed me," and the name had stuck. Grandma Eve. She had not expected to like it. She had expected it to feel patronizing or diminishing or like something imposed on her. But the way they used it was different. It was the way you name something you've claimed, the way a name becomes a belonging. She let it stay. When Michael called again on the 9th day, she was in the middle of a conversation with Diane about centerpieces, and her phone buzzed on the table between them, and they both saw his name on the screen, and Diane very deliberately looked at the wall and said, So I was thinking maybe sunflowers?" And Evelyn picked up the phone and answered it. She hadn't planned to, but her hand did it before her mind had finished the debate. "Mom." His voice was different from the diner. Not softer exactly, more careful, like someone walking across ice and testing each step. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know," she said. "I've been busy." A pause. "Busy?" "Yes." "With what?" She looked across the table at Diane, who was still examining the wall with tremendous concentration. She looked at the budget spreadsheet on her laptop. She looked at the legal pad covered in 3 days of planning notes and the contacts list in the draft sponsorship letter with Cole's notes in the margins. "Work," she said simply. "You're not Mom, you're retired." "I'm organizing a charity fundraiser," she said, "for a senior community program. It's in 5 weeks." A longer pause. She could hear him processing this, recalibrating. "Who are you doing this with?" "Friends," she said. The bikers." "Yes," she heard him exhale. Not quite a sigh, not quite a scoff. Something in between the sound of a man who has decided something and is finding it complicated. "Mom, I think we should talk, properly. What happened at the diner?" "It happened," Evelyn said. "We don't have to go over it again." "I feel like we should." "Michael." Her voice was even. Not cold, she genuinely did not want it to be cold, but even. I'm in the middle of something. Can we talk next week? Another pause. And in that pause, she felt for the first time in years the balance of the conversation shift. She had not hung up on him. She had not forgiven him. She had not demanded an apology or offered one. She had simply continued. She had placed him in the position of waiting. She had never done that before. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, okay, next week. I'll call you Sunday, she said. Same as always. She hung up and set the phone down. Diane was looking at her now, no longer pretending to study the wall. How do you feel? Diane asked. Evelyn thought about it honestly. Like I just did something very small that was actually quite large, she said. Diane nodded. That's usually how it works. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, sitting there with her legal pad and her revised spreadsheet and her slowly solidifying sense of herself, was that across town something was happening in Michael Harper's life that had nothing to do with her. She would find out about it the way you always find out about things you weren't supposed to need to know from someone who mentioned it casually, assuming you already knew. It was Priya who told her on the 14th day. They were driving to a supply warehouse together in Priya's truck to look at folding tables. The table situation had turned out to be more complicated than anyone wanted, and Priya said with the careful tone of someone who has already had an internal debate about whether to say something, I saw something on Facebook. I don't know if you're aware. I'm not on Facebook, Evelyn said. What is it? It's about your son's company. There was a post from a local business reporter. Apparently there's some kind of trouble at the project management firm he works for. Contract disputes, maybe a lawsuit. It's not, I don't know how serious it is, but it looks significant. Evelyn sat with this for a moment. The warehouse parking lot was ahead of them, and Priya was slowing down, and the ordinary logistics of the day continued around the extraordinary fact that had just been placed in the middle of it. How long ago was this posted? She asked. 2 days ago. 2 days. Michael had called her 9 days ago, and his voice had been careful and measured. But careful and measured about what exactly she had assumed guilt. The specific guilt of a man reviewing his actions and finding them insufficient. But what if it was something else? What if the carefulness in his voice had a different source? But she thought about Vanessa's absolute certainty at the diner table. The practice quality of the speech. We've been in therapy. We've been thinking. The way it had the texture of a plan rather than a feeling. She thought about the timing. She thought about the fact that Michael had called not once, but twice, and that the second call had a different quality than the first. I don't need to know about his business troubles, she said finally. No, Priya agreed. You don't. But thank you for telling me. I thought you should know before someone else mentioned it. They went into the warehouse and looked at folding tables, and Evelyn was precise and practical and made a good decision about table quantity and didn't think about Michael for 50 minutes, which was not a personal record, but was respectable. She thought about it on the drive back, though. She let herself think about it properly, which meant sitting with the discomfort of it rather than resolving it into something manageable. The possibility that Michael's outburst at the diner, his cold rehearsed, "You don't belong in our lives anymore," might have had financial anxiety threaded through it. That Vanessa's sharp language about their future and what they could sustain might have been less philosophical than she presented it. That her son might have been drowning and had chosen in his drowning to cut the thing that felt most like an anchor. None of that made it right. She was clear about that sitting in Priya's truck watching the highway pass. None of that made it right, and she was not going to spend the next weeks or months excavating her son's motives to find the interpretation that hurt least. That was what she would have done before the diner. That was the old habit, the careful archaeology of someone else's cruelty digging until you found a reason that made it survivable. She wasn't doing that anymore. But she held the information gently, the way you hold something that might matter later, and she let herself feel the complicated mixture of things that came with it. Concern for her son, that she couldn't turn off frustration at herself for the concern, a slow and difficult recognition that love for someone and anger at them and grief over them could all exist in the same chest simultaneously without any of them canceling the others out. When they got back to the clubhouse, Cole was on the phone. He caught her eye when she walked in, and something in his face shifted, not alarm, but attention. He wrapped the call up quickly. "You okay?" he said. "How do you always know?" she asked. "You're walking differently." She hadn't even noticed. Priya told me something about Michael. His company might be in trouble. Cole was quiet. He didn't fill the silence with anything, didn't offer reassurance, didn't probe. He just waited the way he always waited, with the specific patience of someone who has learned that people say the true thing when you stop giving them the easy thing to respond to. "I'm not going to call him," she said. "I know that's what some people would do, rush back in because he might need something, but I—" She stopped, started again. "I spent 40 years rushing back in. I rushed back in through 2 of his divorces and 3 job changes and his father's death and my own cancer scare that I barely told him about because he seemed busy. And I'm not angry about all of that. I'm not. But I can't—" Her voice caught once, just once. "I cannot let his next crisis be the reason I go back to being something he only notices when things go wrong." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "That's the clearest thing I've ever heard you say," he said. "I've had 13 days of practice. Do you want to call him?" She considered this question properly, which meant she thought about it for longer than was comfortable. "Part of me does," she said. "The part of me that has always been his mother first and Evelyn second. And the other part wants to finish this fundraiser and make it the best thing this county has seen in 5 years." Cole's mouth did the thing that was his version of smiling. "That part can absolutely happen," he said. "Both can happen," she said. "Not everything's going. It's a choice between 2 things." He looked at her. "No," he said slowly. "You're right, not everything is." And there was something in the way he said it that made her look at him more carefully. Cole Ryder was not a simple man. She had understood that from the first day from the diner booth and the extended hand and the story about his mother, Carol. But over the past 2 weeks, she had come to understand the specific shape of his complexity, the particular way his history lived in him. He was a man who had survived things by making himself useful to others, which was its own kind of both gift and avoidance. She recognized the pattern because she knew it intimately from her own interior. "When's the last time someone organized something for you?" she asked. He blinked. It was the most surprised she had ever seen him look, which was saying something. "What? You drive people around and build community and find abandoned old women in diners," she said with a precision that was entirely intentional. "Who does those things for you?" He opened his mouth. "Don't say the group," she said. "I've watched the group. They love you. But you organize them, you plan for them, you carry the worry so they don't have to. That's not the same thing." Cole was quiet for a long time, long enough that she started to wonder if she'd overstepped. Then he said, "My mother used to ask me that same question." She was a smart woman. She was, a pause. "I don't have a good answer for you." "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm not asking for one. I'm just asking you to know that I noticed." Something shifted in his face. Something that had been held in a particular position for a very long time moved almost imperceptibly towards something more open. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully categorize, except that it was the expression of someone who has been seen in a way they weren't expecting and doesn't quite know what to do with the experience. "You're different than you were 2 weeks ago," he said. "I know," she said. "I think I was always this person. I just needed somewhere to put her." That evening, after most of the group had left and Ruth had driven home with the accordion folder and Cole was locking up the back room, Evelyn found herself standing alone in the main room, looking at the corkboard near the entrance. The sign-up sheet for the Sunrise Ride for seniors, the dates going back 2 years. She took a pen from the holder on the corkboard and wrote her name at the bottom of the volunteer list. Not as a participant, as an organizer. Then she added beneath her name, Evelyn Harper, Food and Logistics. Call with questions. She added her number. She stood back and looked at it. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. Mrs. Harper, this is Sandra Marsh. I believe you tried to call me last week. I heard about what you're organizing, so a writer reached out to me directly. I'd like to talk about our nonprofit supporting your spring event. I also want you to know I'm sorry about what happened. Michael told me, and I think he's sorry too, even if he doesn't know how to say it yet. Please call me when you have a moment. Evelyn read the message twice. Then she put the phone in her pocket, looked at the corkboard one more time at her own name, written in her own hand, steady and clear, and she turned off the light. She would call Sandra Marsh tomorrow. Tonight, she had somewhere to be. Ruth had invited her for dinner, the real kind, with the good dishes and the strong tea, and the kind of conversation that goes until 10 o'clock without anyone noticing the time. The kind of evening that 2 weeks ago she would have appreciated as a consolation. Tonight she went to it as something else entirely. Sandra Marsh called first. Evelyn had planned to call her, had written the name on the top of her legal pad that morning, with the intention of doing it after her second cup of coffee, but at 8:14 in the morning, while Diane was still pulling into the driveway, her phone rang and Sandra's name appeared on the screen, and Evelyn answered it standing in her own kitchen with her coat half on. "Mrs. Harper, thank you for picking up." "Evelyn," she said automatically. "Mrs. Harper was my mother-in-law." A small pause, then a warm sound that was almost a laugh. "Evelyn, I'm Sandra. I think you know who I am." "I know who you are." "Then you know this call is a little complicated for me to be making." "I appreciate that you're making it anyway." Sandra exhaled slowly. She had the voice of a woman who chose her words carefully, not because she was calculating, but because she had learned through some experience that careless words caused damage that took a long time to undo. "Cole Ryder reached out to me 3 days ago about your spring fundraiser. He was very direct about the scope of what you're trying to do and what you need to make it work. He was also very direct about you personally. He said, and I'm quoting because it's worth quoting, "She's the most organized person I've met in 30 years and the most stubborn person I've met my entire life. And both of those things are why this event is going to be exceptional." Young Evelyn stood very still. Through the kitchen window, she could see Diane's car in the driveway. He said that, and then he gave me your number and said I should call you directly because, and again I'm quoting, "She doesn't need me to advocate for her, she needs someone to get out of the way." Evelyn put her free hand flat on the kitchen counter. "I didn't know he'd contacted you. I gathered that from your silence." Sandra paused. "I want to help with the event, Evelyn. My nonprofit has a community outreach fund that's specifically designated for senior programming. I can commit $8,000 in sponsorship, and I can bring 3 corporate partners who I believe will each contribute between $2,000 and $4,000 additional." The number landed in Evelyn's chest like something physical. $8,000 was more than double what Cole's fundraiser had ever brought in from a single source. It was combined with the Jerry Hutchins food discount and Margaret's community hall donation and Gerald's trio and the 40% reduction in supply costs. She had already engineered enough to not just run the event, but to build the infrastructure for the senior program to sustain itself for the next 2 years. She did the math in the time it took to breathe once. "That's very generous," she said. "It's appropriate," Sandra corrected gently. "This is exactly what the fund is for. Senior isolation is a public health crisis that gets treated like a personal failing, and programs like Cole's are filling gaps that should have been filled by larger institutions a long time ago." A pause. "I also want you to know, separate from all of this, that I'm aware of what happened between you and Michael." And the name entered the conversation like a change in air pressure. Evelyn's hand pressed harder against the counter. "He told you," she said. "Not the way you might think. He didn't come to me deliberately. I ran into him at a professional event last week, and I could see something was wrong, and I asked him directly. He's not well, Evelyn. I don't mean that as an excuse. I mean it as a fact." "What kind of not well?" "The company's situation is serious. There's a lawsuit from a former client, significant money involved, possibly personal liability. He's been carrying it for 6 months without telling anyone, including, I think, Vanessa, until recently." Sandra's voice was careful, precise. "I'm not telling you this to ask you to do anything. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know the full picture." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Through the window, Diane had gotten out of the car and was checking her phone, giving her time. Diane always gave her time. It was one of the things she had come to rely on. 6 months, Evelyn said slowly. "He's been carrying this for 6 months. At least. 6 months ago, Michael had started calling less. She had noticed. She had told herself it was the natural rhythm of his life, the busyness he always cited, the distance that had been growing for years. But 6 months ago, something specific had happened in his life that he had not told her. Had not told her because what? Because he was ashamed, because telling her would have required admitting vulnerability to the woman he was simultaneously deciding was too much to manage. She thought about the diner, the rehearsed quality of the speech, the therapy framing. The way Vanessa had said, we've been thinking with the certainty of people who have been thinking about one specific thing while managing not to think about another. She thought about drowning men and the things they cut loose. She felt something complex and unresolvable move through her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of a context that made forgiveness conceivable. The difference was important. She held it carefully. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I hope it helps somehow." "It does. I'm not sure how yet, but it does." After she hung up, she stood in her kitchen for 90 seconds without moving. Then she put on the other half of her coat, picked up her legal pad, and walked out to Diane's car. Diane looked at her face. "Good call or complicated call?" "Complicated call. That was also good," Evelyn said, getting in. "Is there any other kind?" "No," Evelyn said. "I've decided there isn't." She told Diane on the drive over. Not all of it, not the parts about Michael's finances that felt like information she was still processing, but the sponsorship news, the $8,000, the corporate partners. Diane's reaction was to hit both hands against the steering wheel in a single sharp clap of pure satisfaction and say, "Evelyn Harper, you magnificent woman," which made Evelyn laugh so suddenly and completely that she had to hold the dashboard. When they walked into the clubhouse, Cole was already there at the back table with his laptop and his coffee and the particular focused stillness of a man going through numbers that aren't cooperating. He looked up when they came in. He saw Evelyn's face. He set down his coffee. "You called Sandra," he said. "She called me," Evelyn said, "because you called her first." She stopped in front of the table and looked at him directly. $8,000, Cole, plus 3 corporate partners. He went very still. 8,000. Plus 3 partners. I haven't spoken to them yet, but Sandra's closing rate is excellent. I looked up her nonprofit's annual report last night. She set her legal pad on the table. With what we already have, we're looking at potentially $22,000 to $26,000 for this event, which is 6 times what we've ever had, Cole said quietly, and which means we can do the event the right way. We can document it properly, and we can use it to build a funding model that doesn't require you to scrape together the same 4,000 every year and hope it's enough. But Cole looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked back up at her with an expression that was complicated and real and had something in it she hadn't seen on his face before, the particular vulnerability of someone who has been working towards something for a very long time and has just been told it might actually happen. "I've been trying to make this sustainable for 3 years, he said. "I know. I almost shut it down twice. Last year we nearly didn't have enough to..." He stopped, started again. "Gus Martino, the man in the photograph, he passed away in December. Natural causes, he was 89, it was time. But he called me 2 weeks before he died, and he said that ride was the best day of the last 5 years of his life." His voice didn't break, but it did something compressed, like a hand pressing against a door. "I didn't want to not be able to do that for the next person." Evelyn sat down across from him. She placed both hands flat on the table between them. "You won't have to," she said. "Not this year. And if we do this right, not for a long time." He nodded once, said nothing. The nothing was full. Bear arrived 15 minutes later, took one look at the two of them in the legal pad and the numbers on Cole's laptop and said, "Something happened," he was told. He sat down heavily in a chair and said $8,000 to himself twice, in the way you repeat a number that your brain is having trouble accepting. Then he stood up, disappeared into the kitchen, and came back with a plate of pancakes he'd apparently been making when they arrived, which he set in the center of the table and said, "Breakfast first, then we figure out how to spend it." Nobody argued with this. Over the next 4 days, the planning moved at a pace that Evelyn later described to Ruth as organized chaos with excellent outcomes, which Ruth said sounded like every event Evelyn had ever run in 30 years, and that was meant as a compliment. Sandra's corporate partners confirmed. Gerald's trio added a second hour to their performance. The community hall was confirmed. The supply order placed the volunteer roster filled. And then Michael called. Not on Sunday. On a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks and 4 days after the diner, while Evelyn was in the middle of a conference call with Sandra and one of the corporate sponsors. She saw his name appear on her screen and declined the call without pausing the sentence she was in the middle of. She sent him a text on a work call. "I'll call you back at 6. She realized after sending it that she had called it a work call without thinking, without quotation marks around the word work, because it was. That was simply what it was. She called him back at 6:02. He picked up immediately, which told her he'd been waiting. "Mom." "Hi, Michael." A pause. The careful pause of someone who has had a conversation in his head several times and is now discovering that the real version doesn't follow the script. "How are you?" "I'm well. Busy. How are you?" Another pause. Longer. Things have been difficult." "I heard," she said, and then because she had decided on honesty as her policy, she added, "Sandra Marsh told me about the company situation." The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. The silence of someone who has been simultaneously relieved and horrified to learn that a secret is no longer secret. "She told you," he said. "Yes." "When?" "Days ago." "Why didn't you?" "Because it was yours to tell me," Evelyn said. "I was waiting to see if you would." He was quiet for so long that she checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. "I should have told you," he said finally, "when it started. I kept thinking I could fix it before it became something I had to tell anyone." "That's a pattern of yours," Evelyn said. "You've been doing that since you were 14. A sound that might have been a short, painful laugh. "I know." "Michael." She sat down. She was in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd taken Sandra's call, where she'd stood for 90 seconds not moving. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." "Okay." What happened in the diner was not acceptable. What Vanessa said was not acceptable. What you said telling me I didn't belong in your life, that's not something I can simply set aside, because I now understand you were frightened and under pressure. Fear doesn't give a person the right to do what you did. Do you understand that?" "Yes." His voice was stripped of everything, just the word. "I'm not saying I can't eventually get past it. I'm not saying our relationship can't recover from it. I'm saying I need you to know, not believe, know that it was wrong, that I didn't deserve it, that I have never deserved to be treated like a burden, not by you and not by anyone." She heard him exhale, a shaky sound. Something was happening on his end of the phone. She could sense it the way you sense rain before it arrives, a change in pressure. "I know," he said. "I know, Mom. I've known since I knew it in the diner. I sat there after you left, and His voice broke in a specific way. She had heard that specific break exactly 3 times in his life. Once when he was 6 and fell off his bicycle and cut his chin. Once when his father was diagnosed. Once when his first marriage ended. "I sat there and watched you walk out with a stranger because I had made you feel like a stranger was safer than me. And He stopped. Couldn't continue. Evelyn sat very still. She let him be in it. She did not rush to reassure him, did not say it's okay, or we'll figure it out, the reflexive comfort she would have offered before the ones that had always let him off the hook, before the weight of his actions had fully settled. She let the weight settle. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "I'm sorry for what I said. And I'm sorry for how long it took me to say that. And I'm sorry for making you feel like you had to apologize for being alive. He stopped again. "I'm sorry for all of it." Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought about Frank. She thought about what Frank would say, and the answer was the same as it had been in the diner parking lot, Evie. Let him in. But Frank had also been the kind of man who knew that letting someone in and holding them accountable were not mutually exclusive. He had understood that love without standards was just accommodation. "I hear you," she said, "and I believe you." She paused. "But Michael, we're going to have to rebuild this slowly. I can't pick up where we were, because where we were wasn't working. Not for either of us, I think. We have to build something different." "I know. That means honesty. When things are hard for you, you tell me. Not because I can fix it, but because I'm your mother and I deserve to know. And I will tell you when things are hard for me." Her voice was steady, but something behind her eyes was burning. "I have not been honest with you either, Michael, about how lonely I've been, about how much I've missed your father, and How much I needed more than I ever asked you for. I didn't ask because I thought it was too much. I spent 30 years deciding in advance that I was too much, and I'm done with that. A long silence. Who are these people? He said finally. The bikers. What I mean, who are they to you, really? Ma, she thought about the question. She thought about Diane and Bear and Priya and Dutch and Patch and the way Cole had looked at her from across the room on the first day and not looked away. She thought about Grandma Eve written on a volunteer sign-up sheet in handwriting she didn't recognize, and the pancakes Bear made without being asked, and the ride on the highway when she hadn't tapped the shoulder once. They're people who made room for me, she said. That's all. That's everything. Michael was quiet for a moment. Is there a man, Cole Ryder? Is he, Michael? She said it with a gentleness that was also a wall. That's not a question you get to ask right now. We're not there yet. Another pause. Fair enough. But I will tell you this, she said. He's a good man. He lost his mother the same way I almost lost you, and he built something because of it. He built something to make sure other people's mothers didn't disappear. She let that land. You should think about that. She heard him breathing on the other end of the line, slow and difficult, like someone learning how to do something over again from the beginning. Can I come to it? He said suddenly. She blinked. What? The event, the fundraiser. Sandra told me about it. I ran into her yesterday and she mentioned it. He paused. I want to see it. I want to see what you've built. The request hit her completely differently than she expected. She had steeled herself for this conversation to be about damage control, about managing Michael's feelings, and managing her own, and finding some careful middle ground that kept the peace. She had not expected him to ask to come, to want to witness. Yes. She thought about it for a full 10 seconds, which she did not disguise or rush. It's in 2 weeks, she said, the Saturday after next. I know, Sandra said. You'd have to come by yourself, Evelyn said. I'm not Vanessa, and I are going to need more time. That's not the day for that. A brief pause. Understood. And you can't come as my son who's doing me a favor by showing up, she said. If you come as someone who wants to understand something, and you volunteer. I will put you to work, Michael. I promise you that. A sound on his end. She identified it a moment later as a laugh, small, real, the laugh of a man who has been tightly wound for a very long time and has just felt something loosen against his will. Okay, he said. I'll be there. She told Cole the next morning. Whoa, they were in the back room early before anyone else had arrived. She told him directly the way she had learned to tell him things without preamble or hedging. Michael had called, Michael had apologized. Michael was coming to the event. Cole listened to all of it without expression. When she finished, he picked up his coffee cup and looked at it for a moment. How do you feel about it? Complicated, she said honestly. I want him to come. I also know that wanting him to come doesn't mean everything is resolved. Those two things are both true. Both true, Cole repeated. I'm not going back to who I was before the diner, she said. Even if Michael and I rebuild this, I'm not going back to the version of me who made herself small so he'd have room to be large. That's finished. I know that, Cole said. You know how I know? How? Because 2 weeks ago you asked me when the last time someone organized something for me was, and nobody has ever asked me that question in 15 years of doing this work, and I thought about it for 2 days before I could answer it. She looked at him. What was the answer? He looked back at her steadily. My mother used to organize a birthday dinner for me every year until she couldn't. Last time she did it, I was 42. I drove 2 hours and she'd made everything from scratch, all my favorites, and I ate and thanked her and drove home and didn't think about what it had cost her to put that together until she was gone, and I couldn't tell her. He set down the coffee cup. Nobody's done that since. Nobody's thought about what things cost me to put together. Evelyn held his gaze. I'm thinking about it, she said. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The air between them had a quality of something settled and true and unhurried, the quality of two people who have been through enough to know that the things worth having don't announce themselves loudly. And the final 2 weeks before the event were the most intense she could remember in a decade. Sandra's corporate partners were confirmed at amounts that exceeded the projections. The food preparation required 3 days and Every person in the group, plus Ruth and two women from Evelyn's church who arrived with casserole dishes and the focused energy of people who know their role. Gerald's trio did a sound check on Friday that had Bear inexplicably emotional, which he denied afterward with considerable vigor. 41 riders confirmed. 23 senior participants, one more than originally planned, a woman named Lorraine, who was 91 and had been on the wait list and called Evelyn personally to ask if there was any room at all. And Evelyn had said yes immediately and then rearranged 3 logistical elements to make it work, because 91 years old and still calling to ask, still reaching for something that was not a woman you turned away. The morning of the event, Evelyn was at the community hall by 6 a.m. Ruth was with her. Diane arrived at 6:15 with Priya and 2 thermoses of coffee. Bear arrived at 6:30, having already apparently been awake since 4. Cole arrived at 6:45, looked at how much had already been accomplished, and said, "I should have just stayed home and let you all do this." "Yes," Evelyn said without looking up from the table she was setting. "I'm being sarcastic," he said. "I'm not," she said, and looked up at him with the expression she had been told by Diane, by Priya, by Bear, by Ruth, all independently, was the expression of a woman who is exactly where she is supposed to be, doing exactly what she is supposed to be doing, and knows it. He grinned, the full version, not the corner of the mouth version. She had not seen this before. It changed his entire face into something younger and less guarded, something that looked the way she imagined he had looked before life had placed its particular collection of things upon him. "Good morning, Grandma Eve," he said. "Don't push it, Ryder," she said, but she was already turning back to the table because she couldn't let him see that she was smiling. At 9:47 a.m., Michael's car pulled into the parking lot, and she knew it was him before she went to the window because Priya, who was watching the door, said her name quietly in the specific tone that people use to prepare you for something. She looked. The silver sedan, Michael getting out of the driver's side alone. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, casual in a way that looked deliberate, like he'd thought about what to wear to a thing like this, and had decided that showing up in anything he usually wore would be wrong. He stood by his car for a moment, looking at the building, looking at the rows of motorcycles in the lot, looking at the activity visible through the windows. She could see on his face, even from here, even through glass, the expression of a man seeing something he had not imagined and being rearranged by the imagining of it. She watched him take a breath. She watched him straighten. She watched him walk toward the door. She went to meet him. They stood face to face for the first time since the diner. He was thinner than she remembered. There were circles under his eyes she hadn't seen in the brief, sharp shock of that morning. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well, which was probably true, and like a man who had been thinking about a great many things which she knew for certain was true. So, he looked at her, really looked at her the way he hadn't looked at her in the diner, the way she wasn't sure he had looked at her in years. "Mom," on him, he said. "Hi, Michael," she said. He reached for her. She let him. He held her carefully like someone handling something they have just understood the value of which is different from the way you hold things you've always known were precious. Those things you sometimes hold too tightly. Things whose value you've just discovered you hold more carefully because you are also holding the awareness of what it costs to almost lose them. She hugged him back. She let herself hold her son, and she let herself feel all of it. The relief and the grief and the love that had never gone anywhere, had never been the problem, had always been exactly the right size and always would be. She let herself feel the complicated texture of forgiveness that is not the same as forgetting, and not the same as approval, and not the same as returning to a dynamic that had hurt both of them, but is something alive and ongoing and chosen over and over because you have decided that the relationship is worth the effort of choosing it. Oh, he was crying. She could feel it. She held him until he wasn't. "Okay," she said, stepping back. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not dry, but they were steady. "You said you'd volunteer." He wiped his face with his sleeve like he was 12 years old. "Yeah." "Good." She handed him a stack of folded tablecloths. "Start in the East Room. Diane will tell you how to set them up. If she tells you twice, you've done it wrong the first time." "Bourgeois." He looked at the tablecloths. He looked at her. And he said with his voice still rough and something in his eyes that was either the beginning of something or the return of something, or both simultaneously, "Okay, Mom." She watched him walk toward the East Room. Then she turned, picked up her legal pad, and went back to work. Because in 43 minutes, 23 seniors were going to arrive at a community hall that still needed finishing touches, and Lorraine, 91 years old, still reaching, deserved the best version of this that Evelyn Harper could give her. And Evelyn Harper always delivered. Lorraine arrived first. Not because she was early, the van from the care home was exactly on time, but because she was sitting closest to the door when it opened, which Evelyn would later learn was deliberate. Lorraine had positioned herself there the night before, and her mind had planned the sitting, had thought about being first through the door, the way some people think about finishing lines. She was 91 years old. She moved with a walker and wore a yellow cardigan and had her white hair pinned up in a style that had probably been fashionable in 1962 and had simply remained through stubborn consistency fashionable to her ever since. She looked at the room, at the tables, the food, the riders in their vests. Gerald's trio setting up in the corner, and her face did something that had no adequate description, except that it was the face of a person who had been told for a very long time that the world no longer had anything like this for them and had just been proven wrong. She looked at Evelyn, who was standing 3 feet from the door, specifically because she had calculated that Lorraine would need someone to look at immediately. "You're the one who made room for me," Lorraine said. "There was always room," Evelyn said. "We just had to arrange the furniture." Lorraine laughed. It was a full laugh, completely unguarded, the laugh of a woman who has lived long enough to find genuine things genuinely funny. She reached out and took Evelyn's hand without asking, and Evelyn took it back without hesitation, and they stood like that for a moment. 2 old women holding hands in a doorway while the rest of the world continued moving around them. The other 22 seniors arrived in the following 20 minutes. Each one came through the door with a variation of Lorraine's expression, the careful hope of people who have learned not to expect too much and are now being asked to reconsider that policy. Evelyn greeted each of them personally. She had memorized their names from the participant list. She used each name immediately, which Ruth had told her once was the most powerful social skill a person could possess, and Ruth was right. Michael was in the East Room when they started arriving. She could see him through the door. He had set the tables correctly on the first try, which she noted, and was now helping Bear move chairs in the particular way that people move chairs together when they have just met and are figuring out whether they can work alongside each other. Bear was talking. Michael was listening. This was, she observed, already an improvement over most of Michael's social patterns. Although Bear caught her eye across the room and gave her a nod, not the Dutch-level expressionless nod. Bear's nod meant something specific, which was, "Your son is all right, don't worry." She went back to the door. One at 10:37, 41 riders lined up outside. She heard the engines from inside the hall, felt the vibration of them in the floor through the soles of her shoes, the same vibration she had felt the first time on the back of Cole's motorcycle, when she had been certain she was making a mistake and had turned out to be wrong. Cole came to find her. "We're ready," he said. "Give me 3 minutes," she said. She went to Lorraine, who was sitting at the center table with the cup of tea and the general bearing of a queen holding court. "The riders are outside," Badubad told her. "You wanted to go first." Lorraine set down her teacup. "I've been waiting 80 years to ride a motorcycle," she said. "I wasn't going to let this one go." "How do you know you've never ridden before?" "Because if I had, I would have kept doing it." She stood, steadied herself on her walker, and looked at Evelyn with clear, bright eyes. "Lead the way." Evelyn led the way. What happened in the parking lot over the next 2 hours was the kind of thing that doesn't translate cleanly into language, which is perhaps why the photographer Priya had found a quiet woman named Becca, who moved through spaces like water present but unimposing, took 412 photographs, and later said it was the most important work she'd done in 7 years of photography. Lorraine went first as planned. Cole rode with her, which had not been the original plan, but which Lorraine had indicated upon seeing Cole was the plan now. Nobody argued with this. She climbed on behind him with a dignity that made 3 people in the immediate vicinity stop breathing, settled her hands on his sides, and said with absolute composure, "I'm ready when you are, young man." Cole was 58. Nobody corrected the young man. Off they rode. The convoy moved through the county roads in a loop that took 24 minutes, which had been Evelyn's suggested timing after consulting with the senior center coordinator about fatigue and the riders about road quality, and Cole about the best route for a first-time passenger who wanted to see the valley from the ridge. She had mapped the route 3 weeks ago. It was by general consensus perfect. Evelyn did not ride in the convoy. She stayed at the hall managing the food, managing the return arrival, making sure that when each group of seniors came back through the door, there was warmth and food and someone looking them in the face with genuine attention. Ruth worked beside her without needing to be asked what to do. They had worked alongside each other long enough that their coordination was wordless, the efficient shorthand of people who trust each other completely. Michael worked too. He had migrated from the East Room to the main hall and was by mid-morning doing whatever needed doing, refilling drinks, carrying plates, helping a man named Vernon, who had arthritis in both hands, navigate a chair that was slightly too low for him. He did all of it without calling attention to it, which surprised her. She had expected him to be awkward, to over-explain himself, to move through the space with the self-consciousness of someone performing goodness. Instead, he just did things, quietly, with the focused attention of a man who has decided to be useful and has no energy left for anything else. She watched him help Vernon, and she watched Vernon say something to him that made Michael stop what he was doing and just listen, and she watched the listening change Michael's face in a way she hadn't seen in a very long time. She turned back to the food station before he could catch her watching. Lorraine returned from her ride at 11:42. She came through the door, slightly windswept and entirely electric, the way people come back from things that have woken something in them that had been sleeping. She went directly to Evelyn. "I owe you an apology," she said. Evelyn looked at her. "For what?" "For every year I sat in that room and decided it was too late." Lorraine's voice was steady and fierce. "I told myself for a long time that I had missed my window for things like this, that things like this were for younger people. And I was wrong about that, and wasting time being wrong about something that important deserves an apology to someone." Evelyn held her gaze. "You're here now," she said. "I am," Lorraine said. "And I intend to be a considerable nuisance about coming back." "Good," Evelyn said. "I'll put you on the list." Gerald's trio played through lunch. The music was the kind that belongs in places where people are eating food someone made from scratch, warm and unhurried, filling the room without overwhelming it. Bear ate 3 plates and declared the brisket the best he'd had since his grandmother's, which was, Evelyn understood, from the weight he gave it the highest compliment in his personal hierarchy. Priya cried once briefly into her napkin and pretended she hadn't. Dutch ate in contented silence and nodded at people so affirmingly that 3 separate seniors later told Evelyn they felt Dutch had really understood them. It was during lunch that Sandra Marsh arrived. She had not been on the original guest list. This was a community event, not a donor showcase, and Evelyn had been clear about that distinction. But Sandra had asked quietly the week before if she might come briefly just to see it, and Evelyn had said yes because Sandra had earned it. She came in quietly, stood near the back and watched. She was a small woman, early 50s, with the composed expression of someone professionally accustomed to keeping her reactions measured. But Evelyn watched the measurements slip, watched Sandra's face as Lorraine told a story to the table around her and made 4 people laugh, simultaneously watched her face as Cole helped an 84-year-old man named Harold put on a helmet with the patient care of someone who considers this exactly as important as anything else he could be doing. Watched her face as her son Michael Harper, crouched beside Vernon's chair, so their eyes were level, and listened to whatever Vernon was saying with the whole of his attention. Sandra found her way to Evelyn at the food table. "Cole told me you built all of this in 8 weeks, she said. "The people built it," Evelyn said. "I organized the people." "That's the harder job," Sandra said. "Usually." Evelyn looked at her. "Thank you for the funding, and for calling me." "Thank you for answering." Sandra paused. She looked toward the room, toward Michael specifically, though she was careful about it. "He's different today." "He's trying out," Evelyn said. "I'm not ready to say more than that yet." "Fair," Sandra said. "For what it's worth, I think today matters to him more than you can see from the outside." Evelyn considered this. "Most things that matter happen where you can't see them," she said. "You just have to trust the evidence." The twist came at 2:15 in the afternoon when Evelyn was in the kitchen checking the pie supply, and her phone rang with a number she didn't know. She almost didn't answer. She nearly let it go to voicemail. Something stopped her, some instinct she couldn't name, and she picked up. "Is this Evelyn Harper?" A woman's voice, older, careful. "It is." My name is Carol Delaney. I'm a producer at KRTV, the local news station. We got a tip about an event happening today, something about bikers in a senior program. I'd like to send a camera crew if that's possible. A brief pause. I understand if it's too late, but what I was told about this program, about how it started and who's behind it, I think it's a story that a lot of people in this community need to see. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, holding a dish towel and a phone, and felt the day make an unexpected move she hadn't planned for. She thought for exactly 4 seconds. "When can you be here?" she said. 20 minutes. "Come to the community hall on Archer Road. Use the main entrance. And talk to Cole Ryder first, not me. He built this." She hung up and went to find Cole. When he was outside with Harold, who had just returned from his ride, and was standing beside the motorcycle with the expression of a man filing an experience into a category he previously thought was closed. She touched Cole's arm and said, "KRTV is coming. 20 minutes. A camera crew." Cole turned to look at her. "How?" "Someone called in a tip. I don't know who." He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. Something passed between them that was not quite a question and not quite an answer, but contained elements of both. "You didn't do this," he said. "It was not an accusation." "No," she said, "but I said yes." He held her gaze for another second. Then he nodded the real nod, the decided nod. "Okay," he said, "then we make it count." She found out later who had called the tip in. It was Ruth. Ruth, who had watched the morning unfold with the calm satisfaction of someone who has known all along that a thing was going to be extraordinary and has simply been waiting for the rest of the world to notice, had found the KRTV number on her phone and made the call at 1:45 while Evelyn was managing the second convoy rotation. Ruth told her this without apology at 4 o'clock and said, "You would never have done it yourself." "No," Evelyn agreed. "That's why you have me," Ruth said. The camera crew arrived in 18 minutes, which was 2 minutes faster than promised, which Evelyn noted approvingly. They were professional and unobtrusive in the way of people who are good at their job, finding angles without disrupting the room, capturing moments without manufacturing them. Carol Delaney was sharp and direct and asked intelligent questions, which Evelyn respected immediately. She interviewed Cole first, which was correct. He spoke about his mother. He spoke about Gus Martino. He spoke about the gap between what communities say about honoring their elders and what they actually do, and he spoke about it without anger, with the steady conviction of someone who has chosen action over grievance. He was extraordinary on camera. Evelyn watched from 10 feet away and felt the specific pride of someone watching a person they believe in be seen the way they deserve to be seen. Carol interviewed Lorraine. Lorraine, who required no coaching and no warm-up, looked directly at the camera and said, "I'm 91 years old and today was the best day I've had in 5 years. Write that down." Carol wrote it down. Carol asked Evelyn for an interview. She had expected to decline. She had intended to. This was Cole's story, Cole's program, and she was 8 weeks old in it compared to his 3 years. But Carol said, "I want to talk to the woman who organized this. Not for the fundraiser angle. I want to understand what brought you here." And Evelyn looked at her and understood that the question was real. She sat down. She told the truth. Not all of it. Not the diner, not Michael by name, not the words, "You don't belong in our lives anymore" on camera in a way that would follow her son for years. But the essential truth that she had been a woman who had lost her sense of her own usefulness, who had made herself smaller for so long, she had almost forgotten her original size, who had been found. That was the word she used, found by people who made room for her and handed her a budget spreadsheet and trusted her to know what to do with it. "What would you say to someone watching this who feels the way you felt?" Carol said. Evelyn thought about the question for only a moment. "I'd say that being old doesn't mean being finished," she said. "It means you have more material to work with than almost anyone else in the room. And I'd say that the people who make you feel like a burden have usually confused their own limitations for yours." She paused. "And I'd say reach. If someone extends their hand, reach. You don't have to know where you're going. You just have to be willing to move." Carol let the silence sit after that for a full 3 seconds, which was, Evelyn knew from 30 years of watching people conduct conversations, the mark of someone who understood they had just been given the line. At 4:30, when the camera crew had gone and the seniors were preparing to be driven back to their homes and care facilities, Michael found her. He had been working for 6 hours. He looked tired in the specific way of someone who has used their body for something their body wasn't accustomed to, and he was holding a stack of folded tablecloths he'd apparently been collecting from cleared tables, which was so practical and so unexpected that she almost laughed. "Tell me where these go," he said. She told him. He went. He came back without the tablecloths. He stood beside her, and they watched the room together as people said their goodbyes. Lorraine accepting hugs with the practiced warmth of a woman finally receiving what was always her due. Bear pretending loudly that something had gotten in his eye. Priya exchanging phone numbers with 3 of the senior participants, Dutch helping Harold with his jacket with the same affirming nod he brought to everything. "This is what you do now," Michael said. "Not a question, a recognition." "This is what I do now," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, stripped of the careful management it had had on the phone, quieter and more honest, in the way that physical exhaustion sometimes produces in people who are usually guarded. "I missed you," he said. "I missed you, and I handled it by telling myself you were the problem, and I know how wrong that was." She looked at her son. "I know," she said. "I want to do better. I know that too." She held his gaze. "But wanting is the beginning, Michael, not the end." He nodded. His jaw was tight in the way it got when he was holding something steady by force of will. "I know," he said. "I know." Cole appeared from across the room, moving toward them in the unhurried way he moved through spaces he considered his own. He stopped at a reasonable distance, close enough to be present, far enough to be respectful, and looked at Michael. Michael looked back. 2 men looking at each other across the specific distance of someone who almost lost a thing and someone who almost had to catch it. "Thank you," Michael said finally, "for what you did at the diner." Cole held his gaze for a moment. "She didn't need much," he said. "She just needed a door." Michael nodded once. He looked at his mother. He opened his mouth to say something else, and then seemed to decide that whatever it was, it could wait, that they had time now, that this was not the last conversation, but the first of a new kind, and that was enough for today. "I'll call you Sunday," he said. "I'll answer," she said. He left at 5. She stood at the window and watched his silver car pull out of the lot and turn onto the road and disappear, and she let herself feel the full, complicated weight of watching him go. The grief of years, the love that had never stopped, the cautious beginning of something that had not yet earned a name, but was real and moving and chosen by both of them. Then she turned back to the room. Cole was there. Ruth was there. Diane was wiping down the last table with the efficiency of someone who considers completion its own reward. Bear was eating the last piece of pie directly from the pan with a fork and arguing with no one in particular that this was a completely acceptable way to finish an event. Priya was helping Lorraine's aide get her coat on, and Lorraine was saying something to Priya that made Priya press her hand against her heart. Evelyn stood in the middle of all of it. She thought about the morning she had ironed her blouse 3 times. She thought about sitting in a diner booth clutching a napkin to hide the shaking of her hands. She thought about the pearl earring that had fallen and been caught, and the hand that had been extended across a table, and the wind on a highway, and a name written on a corkboard in her own steady handwriting. She thought about Lorraine, who had spent years deciding it was too late, and had then decided it wasn't. She thought about Frank, about what he would say if he could see her now, not in the diner, not in the parking lot, but here in this room she had built from a budget spreadsheet, and 31 years of knowing how to feed people, and the stubborn refusal to believe that the best of her life was already behind her. Well, she knew exactly what he would say. He would say, "There she is, Evie. There you are." Cole came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He didn't need to. They stood together and looked at the room, their room built from need and stubbornness, and the radical act of one person refusing to walk past another person's pain without stopping. "Same time next month," he said finally. "Same time next month," she said. "With a better budget, a more efficient table layout, and a menu with 2 additional options that Bear is going to claim he suggested originally." "I did suggest." "You suggested more food," she said. "That's not a menu item, that's a philosophy." Bear made a sound of protest from across the room. Cole laughed, the full version again. It was, she had decided, one of the best sounds she had heard in years. She laughed too. And Evelyn Harper, who had walked into a diner believing she was meeting her son for lunch, who had been told she didn't belong, who had placed her trembling hand into a stranger's steady one, and walked out into a life she hadn't planned and couldn't have imagined, stood in the room she had built and laughed with the people who had chosen her, and understood with the quiet certainty of someone who has been lost and found and remade, she was not the woman who apologized for existing. She never had been. She had simply needed somewhere to remember it, and now she was home.